I'm Martin Sinnott. I'm the president of Glendale Heritage Preservation. And I have to take care of a few administrative items before we get to the main event, which is this presentation by Steve Albert. So I've got 3 items that I need to take care of. First of all, trustees. Glendale Heritage Preservation is run by 25 volunteer trustees. And they each serve a 3-year term. And this year, 4 of those trustees are retiring. They are Jim Wesselman, Nancy Masenko, Joe Dubinsky, and Rob Morgan. First of all, I have to thank them for the time that they've spent at GHP. Jim Wesselman was secretary for a while. Nancy has been president for a while. Joe Dubinsky, you may know him from his television appearances. He has now moved to New Jersey. I can't understand why, but and Rob Morgan. They've all participated in one form or another in Glendale Heritage Preservation's activities. So we need to replace them, and 4 volunteers have stepped forward. They are Elizabeth Aldiges. Unfortunately, she was unable to come tonight because she has a sinus infection, and she didn't want to give it to everybody here.
That's nice.
Elizabeth has been a lifelong resident of Glendale since her family moved here in 1953. She wasn't born at the time. She did attend St. Gabriel's School, where she met her husband in the 5th grade, and where now her great-grandson actually attends. The second new trustee is Betty Robertson. Betty was first introduced to Glendale's rich history by Virginia Galbraith when Betty visited the museum when it was at the police station. As a volunteer for GHP over the years, Betty has participated in the pancake breakfast and has also volunteered at the museum. The third candidate is Cameron O'Reilly. You may know that she is the assistant rector of the Christ Church. She grew up in Georgia, apparently watching this old house with her father. So she's delighted to be living in an old house in Glendale. Apparently it's known as the Courteous Conductor's Cottage. I have to find out why it's so cool.
I know.
Then I'll have to meet Joanne after the meeting. And then the 4th new trustee is Rohit Sharma, often seen riding his bike around the village. His most recent engagement with the community was at the Harry Whiting Brown Community Center, where he has spent 3 years as the treasurer. So I'm looking forward to his valuable contributions to Glendale Heritage Preservation. As a matter of protocol, I have to ask the members of Glendale Heritage Preservation in the audience here to vote to approve these 4 new trustees. So I will ask for a show of hands for approval of all 4 new votees. All those in favour have raised their hands. All those against, please raise your hand. In that case, it is carried unanimously. All right, that's the first item of business. The next item is an award that Glendale Heritage Preservation gives to individuals who have made a significant contribution to Glendale Heritage Preservation. It's known as the Black Squirrel Award, appropriately. And it's not given out every year, but when we identify somebody we feel deserves the award, we make an effort to highlight that person and congratulate them on their contribution. Today the award is going to go to Joanne Goode. Joanne is the archivist for Glendale Heritage Preservation, and she has been a member for at least 20 years, and during that time she has also taken on the role of president for a term. But her principal contribution to Glendale and the Heritage Preservation Group has been her work in the archives. I have some stats that I have here in front of me about what now exists in our archives. There's almost 2,000 photographs. There's over 700 items, textual items and things like that. There are almost 300 objects. The library has 170 books in it. Maps and prints, we have over 100. And in a file of the families that have lived in Glendale, we have almost 1,000. It's a remarkable achievement, bringing all of this information together and cataloguing it, and now it's available online as well, all as a result of the work that Joanne has put in over the last 20 years. So I'd like to congratulate Joanne, and I'm going to give her a certificate. The certificate reads, Joanne Goode, who through her education, experience and considerable knowledge became archivist of the GHP collections and brought them up to date by cataloguing thousands of items, allowing online access, establishing off-site storage to maximize museum space. She also generously served as president for a term and as a trustee guiding GHP for more than 20 years.
Thank you all very much. And it wasn't just me that did all that work, so I just want to point that out.
Good job. So now I'm going to hand it over to Carolyn, who's going to do a member appreciation award.
Welcome to the membership portion of tonight's meeting, and I am so happy to report that as of yesterday, we have 214 people, which is 2 more than we had the same time last year. And as a token of our appreciation, we are going to raffle off a prize that we have here. This is the 2nd year that we've done this, and colored lithograph of Glendale, circa Civil War. If you look at it, it's absolutely gorgeous, and I'd love to have it in our house, but we've decided to be fair. If you are a trustee or an officer, we've taken your names off. And Jack Busher has pled with us to keep his name in, but that's not gonna happen. And if there is anybody in the room who hasn't joined as a member, I know you're sitting there being deeply disappointed for this missed opportunity. But I have brought with me membership forms. Although we can't help you this year, because it'd be too late after the drawing, you could be set for next year. And we are only one away from our annual goal of 215. So if you join, you can be the big hero of tonight, because either you will have helped us reach our goal or helped us exceed our goal. So see me after the meeting. So now, without further ado, we're going to draw the lucky winner, and if Reverend David would come up, who is our latest member, by the way.
214. I'd let my membership lapse. I used to be a different member. Oh my gracious. Lisa Spalding. Come on down.
She's there.
Very rare. Absolutely.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Hold it up. Okay.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
So I want to send out a hearty thank you to everybody for all of your support, whether it's financial or physical or just showing up at the meetings. We thank you with all of our heart.
Now on to the main event. Steve Albert is a Wisconsin man. He wears Wisconsin W's all over him. Even the back of his jeans maybe he'll show you. He's an undergraduate and a graduate of the University of Wisconsin. Professionally, Steve claims he had one of the shortest careers at P&G, but went on to found Health Carousel, a global healthcare staffing company. Now retired, Steve has taken an active interest in art history that he says started when he was at high school. This has led Steve to research the art collection of Glendale philanthropist Mary E. Johnston. This is the story of Miss Johnston and her art collection.
Well, thank you, Martin, Pam, Jack, Susie, Ralph, and everyone at the Glendale Historic Preservation and the broader Glendale community that supports the exploration and preservation of its history. And this presentation actually relies a lot on the archives, and I'm so happy to be here the night Joanne gets the award. Thank you to Christ Church, which is really such an appropriate venue for a presentation about Mary Johnston. She was a longtime member here and supporter of the church. A shout out to Karen here at the church that has helped support this presentation technically, also research assistants at the Hamilton County Library and the Mary Schiff Library, Jenny Harden at the Cincinnati Art Museum, and a special thank you to Dr. Peter Bell here, the curator of European art at the Art Museum. I'd like to thank my wife for daily ongoing encouragement, which I can summarize in 8 words. Get out of the house and do something. Mary E. Johnston, or as you in Glendale would have called her, Miss Mary, of which many of you probably know a lot more than I do. See, I'm an outsider. I'm from the Great White North. I've been in Cincinnati a mere 28 years. When people ask me where I went to school, and I tell them Wisconsin, they look at me baffled. What? We didn't ask you where you went to college. We asked you where you went to school. Did you go to St. X? Did you go to Walnut Hills? Did you go to Princeton? And, guys, I'm not from here. Oh, yeah, Albert's not from here. Well, how many of you have heard of Miss Mary E. Johnston? I mean, do you remember where you heard of her first? From whom? How old you were? Well, I can tell you that I discovered Mary Johnston examining placards, which is something I've come to enjoy. That will tell you that in some cases, the name of the artist, where they painted, their lifetime, the topic, the subject matter. But down at the bottom, you'll see where this piece of art got here. The museum purchased it. Somebody acquired it. Likely someone gave it to the museum. The museum dated it, registered it, accepted the work as a gift. And the museum judged it worthy to be on exhibition or display. I would guess museums exhibit maybe 1/100th of their collection. Peter, I mean, is that even in the ballpark? Is it 1/1000th of their collection? Well, I'm here in the Modern Gallery at the Cincinnati Art Museum studying placards, and I keep seeing this name again and again and again. I mean, in one gallery, I'm seeing this name again, and the question starts changing from where a particular piece of art was collected, but how did this Miss Mary Johnston build a collection of paintings of early 20th century modern art that dominates the modern art collection, and that is of an absolutely staggering value? Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Where was she educated? How did she pursue and assemble one of the finest collections of modern art ever built before 1960 and substantially built in the 1940s? And where would the funding for this have come from? Well, before we get deeper into the topic, a couple of notes. I've converted all dollars, historic dollars, into today's dollars. So if Mary bought something, that's the price she would have paid today. If she donated something, that's the price she would have paid today. While everything in this speech can be footnoted, I've not been shy about using some poetic and even photographic license in telling this story. We're talking about a very great trailblazing woman tonight. We're spending a lot of time talking about her art collection, but she was really much more than a mere art collector. She was a community leader. She was a champion of the down and out, the poor. She was a philanthropist, a woman dedicated to lessening human suffering, and a member of this very church and the community to which she was loyal her entire life. Where did Miss Mary Johnston and her wealth come from? Well, the way I tell the story, it has to do with two sets of sisters. Arguably, this is the origin of Procter & Gamble. This is Alexander Norris, an Irishman. He had two beautiful daughters that were born in Ireland. They were part of the Irish diaspora. At that time, they'd be referred to as Bridgets or Sheilas. Alexander Norris was a prominent candle maker and something of a tallow baron. Tallow being a fat or triglyceride from animals. It's a part of soap and candles. The daughter would marry a candle maker from Cincinnati, William Proctor, in Cincinnati, not from Cincinnati. The other would marry a soap maker, James Gamble. Now, lore has it that it was this guy, Alexander Norris, that put his son-in-laws together and suggested that they form this business. Now, each son-in-law would P&G was started in 1837, put in about $110,000. That's how much they threw into the pot to get this business launched. Before before we talk about the second set of sisters, let's lay the scene, set out the P&G lineage, and get a lay of the land. Okay, so this is William Proctor. He had 10 children. This is his son, William Alexander Proctor. That Alexander comes from Norris, paying homage to the father-in-law of the founder of Procter & Gamble. This is where Glendale comes in. This is the Oaks. This is a vast estate that William Proctor built here in Glendale. Now, William had 5 children, including a son, William Cooper Proctor, who, like his father, would take over the presidency of Procter & Gamble when his father died in 1907. William Cooper, or the Colonel he was called sometime, because of his World War I service, his World War I service in the reserve, recruiting, training, organizing for a world war that America had never been involved in at that scale. He would also build an estate in Glendale, the Woodlands. Okay, up at the top there you can see the Woodlands. At the bottom you can see the Oaks. This is Albion Avenue. This is Albion Avenue. This is Chester Road. So this entire area was Proctor Estates at one time. Now let's introduce the second set of sisters. This is the sister of Anna Titus and Jane Titus. The girls were very close. They loved each other, and they hoped to live in Glendale together. Anna would marry a Glendale P&G soap salesman, Alexander Johnston. They would have 2 children fairly quickly. Margaret in 1888 and Mary in 1890. Mary is the topic of our conversation tonight. But 2 things had to happen. You can see there's no line here to Proctor. There's no line here to Gamble. 2 things had to happen. 1, Anna's sister married William Cooper Proctor. He was then, one of the best educated, Princeton University, richest, powerful men. I find it horribly sexist when I'm going to tell this story about, late 19th century women. But Jane Titus, this is described in the newspapers at her wedding. She was a pretty girl of the blonde type with large, beautiful eyes and that girlish figure of which one delights to see in a young lady, graceful and slight. And that's where the story might have ended. But Jane and William did not have any children. So at the very outset, Margaret and Mary were fawned over, effectively almost shared as children in a certain sense, and having one of the most enlightened, good-hearted CEOs of Procter ever had. But she was an accidental heiress. She didn't have any true lineage. And when an opportunity knocks like that, you've got to be ready to run to the door. And Mary ran to that door. And when that opportunity presents itself to mentor and develop a niece, Jane and Uncle Cooper were fabulous guides and ultimately funders. Now, how would the proctors influence the education of these women and their understanding of the world? What would Mary do with all this privilege? And how would you just have, how would you just have fun? If you're one of the richest guys in Cincinnati, you got 2 nieces, you can spend unlimited money, more or less, on. Well, one thing he did is he would take them on automobile rides. And much like myself, he was an absolutely horrible driver. He would serve them 10-course meals. Now, I don't think I've had a 9-course meal, an 8-course meal, a 7-course meal. He'd take them shopping to New York. In New York, they'd pick out 5 hats and take them back to the hotel room. 5 hats at $500 a piece, and take them back to the hotel room, pick one, and that would be the Easter bonnet the girls would wear here to church on Easter Sunday. Traveling to Paris. There weren't any airlines back then. This is the Mauritania, a luxury liner of the time. Traveling to Paris. The Eiffel Tower was relatively new at that time. Teaching the girls to play tennis at the Lyceum. Margaret was a doubles champion, and and Mary was a singles champion at the Lyceum. One of the most important things I think that the proctors taught these girls and taught them for his own benefit of sorts as well was bridge. This group played a lot of bridge. There was a lot of bridge being played here in Glendale around the turn of the century. Also, providing writing lessons. Cooper would write to Mary how they were writing in the East. They were still writing the English style rather than a stride as they were writing here in the West. And Cooper would mention that they were a little bit behind the times out there. Now, just to give you a feel, in 1909, Cooper built Alexander, Anna, Margaret, and Mary a house. They already live on Erie Avenue or Street. He builds them a house in 1909 so they can be closer to each other. Now, we've all heard about, in this time, day and age, helicopter parents. What the heck? Helicopter aunts and uncles? But one very important lesson that Uncle Proctor taught Mary early was that with great wealth and privilege comes even greater responsibility, which is so appropriate to be talking here in an Episcopal church in which service to the Lord is so important. It's very, very, very gratifying here as a speaker to be in a historic place like this. Okay, let's talk about Mary's education and how that might have contributed to her lifelong love of art. Mary and Margaret went to the relatively new Episcopalian National Cathedral School in Washington, D.C. This is the school that presidents' daughters went to then, and presidents and vice presidents' daughters go to now. This is the original building. It's called Hearst Hall. It was donated by the richest woman in America, Phoebe Amberson Hearst. She may be better known as the mother of William Randolph Hearst. Now I want to talk for a moment about the value of a good art teacher. A good art teacher is much more valuable than any museum director. And the reason is because a museum director could be fired, but an art teacher might languish and deprive a generation of an opportunity to build a foundation for lifelong art appreciation. Well, Mary and Marty Margaret, had an exceptional teacher at the National Cathedral School. Her name was Lola Sleeth. Lola studied at the prestigious Académie Julian in Paris. And she was not only, studied, but she was an accomplished painter in oils. She was an accomplished painter in watercolors and a sculptor in stone. This is in the National Gallery. Your high school art teacher has this in the National Gallery. This work is known because it became the model for the 4-cent stamp. How might this have influenced Mary? I mentioned her teacher studied at the Académie Julian in Paris. Now, that's the same elite French art school that Pierre Bonnard studied at, that Jean Arp studied at, that Henri Matisse studied at, that Paul Cézanne studied at. Why is it relevant and important? Because each of these artists are represented in Mary's collection. This is Romanian blouse, this is still life, this is landscape, and this is wheel by Jean Arp. Her youthful, art collecting eye or anchor was likely shaped by the Taft Museum and by these two people, Charles Phillips Taft, Phillips, Yale, Columbia Law School, son of Alfonso Taft, the U.S. Attorney General. He married Anna Sinton in 1873. They had independently traveled to Europe earlier in the 1870s and visited many of the great art museums in Europe. Then 30 years later, they go to Europe again. It's 1903, 1906. They are building their collection. Why then? Why then? Well, because in 1900, Anna's father died. And she was an only child, and she inherited the estate of her father, Davidson, Irish iron baron. He was worth $700 million. This would have made her the richest woman in Cincinnati. It would have made her the richest woman in the state of Ohio at that time. Their collection is different. One of the things that they started doing in 1903 is that the Tafts would make their collection available for viewing by inviting some artists, artisans, and other prominent citizens to their home on select Sunday afternoons for tea. Jane Cooper Proctor likely would have been invited to these teas, and she would have delighted taking her daughters to these teas, where Mary maybe first got lost admiring art, or hearing stories about the artist or the art, or how it was collected. Two of the strengths of the collection are very different than where we're going to talk about most of today. They're Flemish painters, Frans Hal, there's two Van Dycks, and there's Rembrandt. Also American painters. That's James McNeill Whistler at the piano. That's Robert Louis Stevenson by John Singer Sargent. That's The Cobbler's Apprentice by Cincinnati's Frank Duveneck. And Henry Farney's Visions of the American West. But all of these paintings were painted before Mary was born. And eventually, Mary would only collect art that was painted after she was born, or from artists that were alive in her time. So we can see that the Tafts went back. Mary was staying right on the edge at the time. In 1908, this is how Mary expressed her love and interest of art appreciation. Domenico Ghirlandaio He's an Italian Renaissance painter, born in 1448. The artist was deeply religious, as was Mary deeply religious. And how do we know she was interested in this? Because in 1908, as a high school student, or finishing up as a high school student, she presents a paper on Ghirlandaio to the Glendale Art Club. So her education at the National Cathedral School provided her with a keen, deep sense of art appreciation and art history. This was a young woman that very early took art very personally and loved it. Between 19 and 40, the ages, Mary would lead a life of study, preparation, service, adventure. She was focused on being useful, but at the same time, she was pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be a liberated modern woman. First, this is Mary. First, Mary studied with the revolutionary Montessori method in both New York and Rome under Marie Montessori herself. She wanted to explore bringing this educational innovation to Cincinnati. Next, she'd study nursing in Cincinnati. In her mid-20s, she worked as a nurse for the American Red Cross during World War I in Nice, France. Horrible carnage, much worse than what Florence Nightingale would have seen a generation before in the Crimean War. This is a picture of Mary in France and Roland Richardson.
Oh my God.
Oh, I'm glad to hear those. It's because Roland was here from Glendale. And if I look at those faces, it's almost like they just got done doing a flight they shouldn't have done, or were just getting ready maybe for Roland to take Mary up in that airplane. In her 30s, she would take her nursing knowledge to the Philippines. She's a nurse educator, likely the first Western-educated nurse educator in the Philippines at the time. She's at St. Luke's Hospital in Manila. St. Luke's Hospital was the best hospital then. It's the best hospital now. It might have been that Mary was laying some groundwork in nursing that allowed this to evolve as one of the great hospitals, or the greatest hospital in the Philippines. Okay, it's a few years later. We're in the 1930s. Mary's now in her 40s. Her mother's dead. Mom died in 1910. Her sisters passed away. She passed away early at the age of 40 in 1928. And her uncle died in 1934. This might have been a time of reflection, escape, self-discovery, and she ended up returning to her love of art. Mary studied art for 3 years at a Carnegie painting course. She took affiliated with Cincinnati Art Academy. But you also, at this level, you also can have the best teacher in town, and she did. Carl Zimmerman. Carl Zimmerman was her private instructor. He's one of Cincinnati's greatest muralists. This is St. Peter's and Chains downtown. This is right around the corner. This was 8 years ago. This was that big mural at Princeton that they put together $100,000 to preserve. Carl remembered Mary as having an extraordinary eye, unique sense of color, fearless, strong, and colorful. A few years later, she knows what she wants to be, how she wants to be at use right now. She starts her 16-year quest to bring modern art to Cincinnati, to Glendale first, and to Glendale first. I mean, her collection, she used to give out to the schools for their fundraisers and stuff. She said she was really nervous about all this, this painting was out of the house. But I mean, that's just the kind of benevolence that this woman had. She's ready for a new adventure, ready to put her taste, training, connoisseurship, her eye, her resources to a test. Her collection would be one of the only things that she would put her name on, but it was for Cincinnati. Her paintings would instruct all of my paintings are to be given to the Cincinnati Art Museum. She would go in an entirely different direction from the Taft collection that she grew up with. It would be 20th century, it would be modern, it would be overwhelmingly front-centric, and it would be on the vanguard of New York modern art collecting in the 1940s. Now, I won't have time to go through every piece of her 35-piece bequest to the Cincinnati Art Museum, but I'd like to take you through a couple of her acquisitions and illustrate her thoroughly modern taste, how she stretched her money. She really got the maximum bang for her buck. Learn how she may have discovered the work and suggested a really real sense. I mean, Mary was buying paintings while the oil was drying. To understand how to measure that eye, although she was buying these paintings, how great paintings were they? I mean, why are they great paintings? How do they compare to the taste of Cincinnati? And how would they survive in the 20th century modern art market? Finally, we'll explore a little bit how the collection holds together by examining some of the threads to see if we might form some tapestry. Okay, this is Picasso before he came to Paris. This is Picasso. This is Picasso after 5 years in Paris. This piece, I think Peter would be additive to any modern art collection in the United States right now. Anyone would love to have this. It's only the second or third painting in this style. It's called Analytical Cubism. It was done in 1910. This has gone through various names: composition, abstraction, cubist composition, and finally, still life with glass and lemon. Analytic cubism defines a style of cubism that fractures its subject into layers, multi-dimensions. There might be 4 or 5 dimensions these guys are trying to. There's time dimensions. They're walking around the tables trying to get different glances of this. In 1910, this was radical. This brought art to almost total abstraction. The viewer was challenged to analyze rather than passively observe or rely on his pre-programmed eye. That he or she was used to responding to representational art. Mary purchased this in 1944 to illustrate how cutting edge that was. Is the great Chicago Art Institute did not acquire their first analytical cubism piece until 1948. This is perhaps how Miss Mary looked on the outside, but she was transitioning into Miss Mary, Cincinnati's greatest modern art collector. This is a cornerstone, one of the cornerstones of her collection. Undergrowth with 2 figures by Van Gogh. I think this might have been one of her favorite paintings. Why? Because I think it's probably the painting that she might have spent the most money on. The painting was painted northwest of Paris in the same year that Van Gogh died, which, by coincidence, was the year Mary was born, 1890. She pursued it. She knew her Cincinnati audience when she was purchasing this. And how do we know that? Because this painting has been voted in a People's Art Poll as Cincinnati's favorite painting. You're buying this painting for Cincinnati, you hit a complete bullseye. Both of these pieces were owned by the art dealer Jacques Siegelman, who acquired the Van Gogh in 1843. He paid $470,000 for that painting. That's a lot of money. That was a very well-traveled Van Gogh that, many exhibitions. The asking price was $940,000. So we get a feel for how Mary negotiated art purchases in looking at the archives of the Mary Schiff Library at the Cincinnati Art Museum. And if it didn't take place by correspondence, here's kind of how I imagine the negotiations went, but they track the correspondence. Mary, Jacques, I love the Van Gogh. I'm very interested in the Picasso, but I could never afford it at those prices. Siegelman, well, would $750,000 worth? Mary, and throw in the Picasso? Jacques, perhaps. Oh, Jacques, I'm terribly sorry. The most I could possibly go would be $700,000. And that's where the deal got done. Asking price 1.2, sold $700,000. Now, it was win-win. The dealer made, $100,000, $200,000. She and Jacques would do business before and after this. When Mary died, Theodore Schemp, writing the director of the CAM, I really need to be at the opening of Mary's first exhibition after she's passed away. I'm coming from Paris, I need to get my tickets. The opening had been postponed a few times, and he wrote, she was more than a client. She was much more like a friend. She endeared herself to her dealers, and they to her. I think her favorite painter was George Rouault. And we take that guess because 6 out of her 35 paintings were of Rouault. Rouault was born a painter. To earn a living, however, he started working in stained glass. This piece is titled Flowers. It was initially commissioned as a tapestry. You can almost imagine if it was laying down as a rug or even hung by itself as a tapestry. I think it also captures perhaps his background as a stained glass maker. Rouault became fascinated with clowns, and it came to them with both kind of a pity and an admiration. This is one of 2 paintings of clowns by Rouault that are in Mary's collection. Degas, Toulouse-Lautrec, Picasso would even focus sometimes on the down and out, the vulnerable. This, I think, is one of Mary's favorite paintings. It shows a dignified Christ, head erect, yet wearing a crown of thorns. It hung at the Orlington Farms Conference Center that we'll talk about later for a while. And I know it was one of her nieces, Anne Sawyer Williams Green, favorites, because the Cincinnati Art Museum presented it with a fine commission copy after Mary's death. One of the unique things is that Mary bought fresh painted canvases upon which that oil may have still been drying. Now here's an example. Somehow, Mary meets Charmian van Wiegand. Charmian van Wiegand is one of the oddest ducks that you can imagine. She's a daughter of an artist and a German-born war correspondent. She's born in Chinatown, San Francisco, lives in Moscow, 1929, 1932, was a journalist, starts painting seriously around 1932, 1934. That's the same time Mary's starting to paint here in Cincinnati. She marries a communist activist and newspaper publisher of the New Masses. She becomes part of the New York modern art scene. She's kind of a writer, painter, art critic, art collector. Well, somehow she hooks up with Miss Mary. Miss Mary purchases one of her paintings. This is Van Wiegand in her later years. Here's Miss Mary, but they're just not typical gal pal stuff, from Glendale or from National Cathedral School. And as I said, I think they remained friends their entire life. Now, Charmian introduces Mary to Pete Mondrian. Mondrian was a bit of a nut. Mondrian was a big fan of swing and jazz, and he loved dancing to the Charleston, which during its introduction was prohibited in some dance halls around the world for being too dangerous. He once told the Dutch press that he would never return to the Netherlands if the Charleston was banned from there. The guy was in the dance for some reason. In September 1938, Mondrian leaves Paris, facing the advancement of fascism. He moves to London. After the Netherlands falls, in 1940, he leaves London for Manhattan, and there he becomes obsessed with the boogie woogie. This is Van Weident. This is Mondrian. And there's correspondence about, thank you for introducing me to Mary, at one of these New York gallery openings. Now, I'll show you what that gallery opening might look like, or some of the pieces it contained. He creates this piece and exhibits it in New York in 1941. It doesn't sell. He takes it back to his apartment. His apartment is painted only in white and red. I did mention he was a little bit of a nut. And reworks it while dancing to the boogie woogie. He shows it at another gallery, a show that Charmian took Mary to. But Mary doesn't buy it. Rather, she makes a discounted offer after the show closes and purchases it in March 1942 for $13,400. I mean, I'd have a tough time going to summer fair, dropping $15,000. I just have a tough time doing it. But, Mary's doing it. Now let's talk about, the value of what's going on here. About this painting. This is one of the most celebrated architects of the 20th century. This is Philip Johnston. He's the winner of the first Pritzker Prize in Architecture. The Cincinnati Art Museum, downtown, Zaha Hadid. She's also a winner of the Pritzker Prize. He acquires the Museum of Modern Arts, one of the most, powerful modern art museums in the world in 1941, just a year before Mary. This is an example of Johnston's architecture. This was her taste in architecture too. Does it remind anyone here of any of Glendale's architects' work? Sure, it's Woody Garber. So she supports both modern arts and avant-garde modern architecture. So in her collecting, she's going toe-to-toe with some of the largest institutions, the crispest of eyes. She's on the bleeding edge, as was Johnston. But unlike Johnston, Mary doesn't completely go Hollywood the way Johnston did. Now we know that Van Gogh was a bullseye, Cincinnati's most popular painting. We know that this painting hit a bullseye too. And let me explain how we know that. This piece comes up for auction, now titled New York, 1941, Boogie Woogie. How do we know that this was a spectacular purchase? Because some 60 years after Mary bought this for $13,400, it breaks all records for Mondrian. It shatters them. How much do you think that painting went for in today's dollars? To the right guesses out there and got their calculator, we're throwing out $33 million. And I wouldn't have bought it at some. which shows, just how, cutting edge that eye must have been. Well, let's talk another way and see if we can figure out how this collection is put together. Potential vantage point might be to look at the individual threads for collection. See how they're interwoven together. Look at each thread. Examine where it came from. How does it fit in? Where's the connectiveness? The inherent gravitational pull that keeps the collection together. Now let's go back to the Picasso. We know Picasso spent plenty of time in Paris. Who else was there? Well, Henri Matisse was there. Around 1906, they meet for the first time. They become lifelong friends and rivals. So, two artists as friends. Who else was in Paris at that time? Well, Amedeo Modigliani. These are all in Mary's collection at about the same time. The subject of this is the poet painter Max Jacobs. Max Jacobs was Pablo Picasso's early roommate in Paris. So now we're connecting artists that were friends, that were educated together at the same moment, in the same city, perhaps making paintings of other friends who are sharing housing. Let's look at it, maybe another way, how these paintings might be looked at as connected. This is Still Life by Georges Braque. Remember, it was Braque and Picasso that created analytical cubism. Braque, in his early days, was a Fauvist. Matisse was a Fauvist in his early days. Now, friends, deeply collaborating together at different places, times, are processing that are progressing through various styles. Finally, look at the subject matter there of the Braque. It pays homage to this man, Paul Cézanne, whom every one of these painters would cite as one of their most important artistic influences. And his paintings gave contemporary artists permission to push the boundaries of conventional technique. She would have learned about Cézanne, of course, at the National Cathedral School with Lola Sleep. And who else was in Paris? Well, Mary was in Paris. She was in Paris in 1909 as and then again in her teens, and then again later in 1916. In the teens, when she was in Nice. Had she seen their paintings? Had she heard about them? Had she read about them? Was she chasing this merry band of artists and their art her whole life while remembering these days? Well, here's another way that the collection might be thought of as interwoven. This is Marc Chagall, Russian, French, Jewish. Mary purchased this from Matisse's son, Pierre, because Henri was back in France during World War II when this transaction would have occurred. Nice is where Mary was, too, just coincidentally, just odd things like this pile up on themselves. So these purchases, would have naturally been negotiated, oftentimes in French. Mary could write and speak French fluently. At a minimum, there's some personal connection to the time and place her art was created, which provides some sort of internal coherence. Miss Mary had studied and trained and developed her eye. She worked at it. She got into studios. She went to cutting-edge shows. She was confident. She jumped on something when her eye told her it was the right time. She became a very formidable 20th century art collector, very different from the Taft collection that was put together in a very short period of time. They relied heavily on intermediaries, advisors. Mary bought over 16 years, relying on her trained eye, her due diligence, and her negotiation acumen. In 1948, there's kind of a time of pause, reflection, recalibration, I think she's revisiting her mantra that her uncle left with her, you know, with great wealth and privilege comes even greater responsibility. We discover some of this in exchange with a dealer who offers to bring her a small Brock to her house, which she expressed an interest. And it replies, it's, unfortunately, I've made some commitments during the next 4 years. They're just gonna take me and my resources. In short, I've got other stuff to do right now and other ways of being of use. She'd focus on building her aunt's and her uncle's legacies. Her aunt would die 5 years later in 1953. What were some of those projects? There's her aunt. Christ Church here. This was one of her favorite philanthropies. The community of Transfiguration here in Glendale, allowing these women, an order that was started in 1998 to retire gracefully. The National Cathedral. They were big in state, national, Episcopal affairs, both of them. Jane Proctor Hall, not Mary E. Johnson Proctor Hall at Cathedral School that she went to, someone else. Children's Hospital. Cooper's name is all over Children's Hospital would not be what it is today without the Proctors. It wasn't just their money, it was setting the direction. Including Mary, who served on the board. Cincinnati School of Nursing, one of UC's largest and most respected institutions. It wasn't known until after Mary had died in 1967, who had funded the school's $20 million modern construction expansion. Who designed it? Glendale guy, Woody. The Proctor Center. The Proctor Center, again, not the Mary Proctor Center, the Proctor Center Retreat in Orlandton, Ohio. Mary enjoyed art till the very end. She flew out a curator from the Guggenheim Museum in New York to moderate a talk in 1966 between Tom Wesselman, Robert Indiana, and George Siegel. I mean, she loved art her entire life. How'd she like to do things? She liked to do them anonymously. I mean, she was behind the scenes type. She didn't need the pat on the back. But her collection, nobody else could have done this. The Budding Contemporary Art Center couldn't do it by itself. Certainly, her collection wasn't P&G style, it wasn't Taft style, it wasn't the Cincinnati Art Museum's style. After Aunt dies, she makes a few more purchases. Nicholas de Stael, Sergei Polakov, Joseph Albers. Yet she buys this painting directly from the artist, very unusual. Mary's collection was not fully exhibited until 1956, after her aunt had died in 1953, and for the first time after she died in 1972. So what do we learn tonight? Well, we learned that she was an accidental heiress. She wasn't a direct lineal descendant or heir to the Proctor fortune. She had good fortune to have good art teachers, but she worked at art too. She not only knew how to study art history, but she actually picked up the brush and studied how to create art. She built her collection relying on her own eye. She went to cutting-edge openings, to these artist studios. She bought direct. She was loyal to her dealers, but she was also very frugal. She stretched her treasure to the benefit of the Cincinnati and the whole Cincinnati art community. All of her art went to the CAM. Her education, travels to France, her master of French likely influenced her collection. She was humble, she was anonymous, but in the end, Mary and her collection that all went to the Cincinnati Art Museum were thoroughly modern. Thank you to the GHP and you, the audience. audience for coming out, learning about one of Glendale's greatest philanthropists, Miss Mary E. Johnston. Well, since Brenda was talking about fundraising earlier, if anyone's interested, we've got a very limited number of these. Here's the original 1973 exhibition catalog. It's available for $50 contribution to the GHP. These were generously provided by the Cincinnati Art Museum. They're collectibles. They're truly a piece of Glendale history. Compliment any bookshelf and coffee table, and all the money goes. Thank you.
Steve has suggested that the $50 per copy goes into a scholarship fund. If you care to purchase one of these, then that contribution will go to a scholarship. I'd like to thank Steve enormously for such an interesting presentation. It was based upon unique research. All of the information that he's presented here has been accumulated over the last year by his keen interest in art history. So once again, Steve, I think it was a wonderful presentation, quite absorbing and most educational. Thank you so much.